Well, here we have two interesting stacks of books containing the poetry and prose of two singular authors. On the one hand, Christopher Matthew, and on the other, Nigel Frith. They're singular in part because they've been friends for over 60 years, and we'll hear how they got to know each other in the first instance. Chris, do you remember that?
No, not really. I mean, Nigel's been a friend for all these years because it's like he's always been there. And to look back over it, I could remember certain incidents. I mean, I know that, were you in Henry IV?
Yes.
Yes, I tried to get on into that because I thought that I'd be an actor when I got to Oxford for various reasons.
Wouldn't they let you be in it?
No, I didn't quite pass. No, hopeless, absolutely hopeless.
Oh.
But yeah, I remember you were in that. And then whether I knew you at that stage or met you at that stage.
Yes, of course you did, Chris.
Because it was sort of a little actress group, wasn't there? We used to meet in the Kemp for coffee.
I mean, but we were at that weekend at Sherry's parents' place. That was a winter.
Oh, I'd forgotten about
and
that.
Was before Henry IV.
But you're talking about being at Oxford now, aren't you?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, well,
yeah, so Oxford undergraduates.
Yes.
The same vintage, exactly?
Yes, I thought so, yes. Different colleges.
Different colleges.
But this particular incident was so extraordinary. People used to come back, if you were kind of doing a bit of something extra, like you were in a play or whatever, you would perhaps come back earlier than was required. And I think we came back earlier and we went for the weekend to Sheridan Morley's parents.
That was it.
And it snowed.
And it was very...
And we couldn't get back because we sort of got blocked in. So we had this very, very cold weekend and went tobogganing and things. And, and then back to Oxford. So I think really that was the start of it, probably.
I think Robert Morley tried to drive us in the car, which he doesn't drive. And it was snowing and we turned back. And so we stayed with them.
Yeah, no, you could never drive a car. I mean, I
remember.
But used to drive into lampposts and say that chap's driving on the wrong side of the road.
Yes, it was a memorable winter snow up in a lovely cottage near Wargrave.
Yeah. But when the term actually started, I think I'm right in saying you were both reading English.
Yes.
I think so. I seem to remember that. Yes, but Nigel was an altogether more serious and more literary figure than me from the word go. I mean, I got there rather late in life. I was much older than you, and probably still am.
Yes.
I was. I mean, I had to wait to come up, as they used to say, and I'd already sort of worked. A schoolmaster and various things. So in a way, it was very difficult to get back into being a student, but you came straight from school?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, but I remember thinking that you're a literary figure and you kind of are more interested in English literature than I am.
So I just always assumed that. You didn't exactly bond over literary criticism?
I don't think there was a lot of that. It was kind of where we're having coffee this morning. Are you going to be at the Kemp?
Yeah.
Because there was this cafe where we always used to meet, these sort of actory people. To gossip, basically. But there were other things too, weren't there?
Well, there was the Kemp. I mean, you had to get up in time to get to the Kemp at 11 o'clock.
Yes.
And then, of course, you had to be at the Gloucester Green or the King's Arms for lunch. And then we'd rehearse in the afternoon. And then you went to the college for dinner.
Yeah, but what about that club we belonged to, that society?
The 55 Club, yes.
No, not that. No, that was your thing. No, the thing when we read Restoration comedies.
The Mermaid Society.
Yes, the Mermaids.
Yes.
That was another thing altogether. We used to meet in this Don's room, and there were a gang of us, perhaps, a dozen, and we would read Restoration comedy, and we'd read the first 3 acts in a sort of really serious way. The 4th act was then whoever the president at the time would then make it up what the 4th act was, and then we do the 5th act, by which stage we'd completely forgotten the plot. And then there was a loving cup.
Then there was a loving cup.
It was a sort of old-fashioned kind of Oxford idea, which was invented, I think, by Compton Mackenzie in about 1890. Right. And it was still going. Yes, it was a very old established.
Well, I must say, you make it sound like damned hard work.
Well, I can't say I enjoyed it much, but we did. Graham Harley was the secretary, and he arranged for us to have dinner once, a Mermaid Society dinner in the down by Christchurch.
What, the Elizabeth?
What? The Elizabeth.
Yeah.
Oh, the Elizabeth. How very topical.
Yeah.
Yes.
I couldn't really afford that, so I probably didn't come.
You did.
It's the most expensive
Sir John
restaurant.
Maud gave a talk.
You know, well, you got me there. I mean, I probably was there.
But during
I'm
this
so worried about
period, at any time did you think you were going to be writers?
No, I mean, I didn't really write at all at Oxford. I mean, I had this idea from sort of an early age, and it was to do with a schoolmaster of mine when I was about sort of 12, 13, who had read he read everything. When he said to me once, "I'm going to be reading Trollope again this winter," I said, "What you mean, the sort of Barchester and so on?" He said, "No, I mean them all. There are 46 of them. I'm going to read them all." And this is actually the third time. I mean, he was so knowledgeable about English literature, and he inspired something in me at that stage. And one of the things he inspired me in was humour. And P.G. Wodehouse, he introduced me, and he said, "I remember there was a boy in my form once, and I caught him, and he'd got the outer jacket of whatever we were supposed to be doing, and I realised that inside the jacket was P.G. Wodehouse." He said, I couldn't reprimand him. I wasn't able to. So I sort of always wanted to write, but I didn't. I don't think it was until I left Oxford that I actually got down to it.
Yes, what about you, Nigel?
Oh, I was very serious poet, yes. I was training myself, you see, to write proper poetry and proper metre, because I was anti-modern poetry with all its jagged this and that lines and no proper metre. So I was in training, and, you know, I thought, so when I was... Well, that's how I got my first book together, because I was training myself to write like Chaucer's love poetry, and then I fell in love with Vicky, you remember?
Oh,
did you meet
yes,
Vicky?
Yes, of course I did. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, absolutely. I mean, you stole the march on us, because when we were all messing about, all the chums were away. I mean, Sherry was over in, wasn't he, apparently doing theatre.
Oh, he went to Hawaii.
In Hawaii, and
Yes.
wrote saying the beaches are lovely here. Others of us were away. Nigel was producing a volume of verse in honour of, in celebration of his then girlfriend, Vicky.
Yes.
Well, that, I mean, so we all came back thinking, crikey, well, we'll never catch up with him now. He's already got a book published.
Yes, you see, they didn't tell me this. If I'd known they were kind of envious, I would have...
But it's interesting
all
that you kicked off with poetry.
Poetry, definitely.
And then moved on
Definitely.
to
Yes.
Homeric epics, novels and
Yes.
so forth.
Well, I mean,
Whereas Chris started off with his novels and humorous and otherwise, and then moved on to the verse.
was this
later
your
on.
first one?
Yeah. No, that was
The
quite
Junket
an early
Man.
one, The Junket Man. Well, that was based... Well, I was a journalist.
Was that
Well,
that was a very early one, wasn't it?
That was a very early one, but that was based... I've been in advertising for 5 years, which was very useful, because you learnt actually how to write stuff that actually got published. I mean, you had to know how to cut, you had to know how to be precise, you used to have to know a great deal in order to, to be of any use in the business. But I didn't want to do it really. I was much more interested in I say books and so on, and this came as a result of something I got involved in, which was a sort of slightly dotted Dutch woman called Baroness Vera Vokrot, and she had invented a travel company, and she and her daughter ran it. And what they did was they go and stay in country houses with guests, probably Americans, because they were selling it in America, and you would feel that you were a guest in this house, not a tourist, not somebody paying. You would be welcomed as a guest. And we went on the sort of, a lot of us went on the inaugural thing, and I'm afraid we behaved extremely badly. I mean, we didn't sort of knock the place about, but this was based on the first house we went to. And the poor chap, I remember him meeting me at the door as we all arrived off the bus, saying, "Do you have any idea who's paying for all this?" I said, "No, I'm afraid I don't." He said, "No, all right, I suppose we're okay." Anyway, the fact was...
Who did pay for it?
I've no idea, because she was bust before we started.
Oh,
I mean,
really?
she'd already gone bust, the company. And we went all around Europe, and that was based on these terrible journalists arriving and behaving extraordinarily badly.
But when Chris was in the advertising firm, he invented a very famous advert, which was Three Musketeers Go to Paris or something, wasn't it?
Yes, well, there were lots. Well, in a way, invented in advertising was it wasn't quite like that. It was usually a lot of people had got together to produce the thing that finally came out. And it was very difficult ever to get any credit for anything. So although you may have been at the beginning of some extraordinary campaign which made millions for people, it was always about 25 people claimed credit. And I think it was that you were never the author, do you know what I mean? You never created it, and that always bothered me slightly.
Well, there was quite a telling line in your book, A Nightingale Sang Over Fernhurst Avenue.
Road. No, Fernhurst Avenue would have been a different part of England. We didn't have avenues in the country where I lived. It was
the point is,
Road.
I've been calling it Fenchurch Road.
That's the railway station.
The boy asks his mother whether advertising is lying. And she replies, not really. It was more a question of trying to persuade people that something is better than it is.
Yes. Well, a friend of mine, but somebody who became a friend of mine, invented an extraordinary seminar, which we all went on when I was working at J. Walter Thompson, and it was on the subject of magic. And he had this brilliant idea that at the time of the Industrial Revolution, magic was brought into people's lives by the poets. And he said, our job is to bring magic into people's lives, and we're going to examine the whole subject of magic, from primitive magic, you know, all the way through until the magic of cinema, the magic of music, the magic of... And we spent a weekend in this extraordinary hotel in Surrey. And, I mean, it was a total revelation. And I don't want to exaggerate, but I know an enormous number of people who were on that seminar left afterwards. I mean, not straight away, but afterwards, having sort of seen kind of another world out there.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, it was...
And you were supposed to bring magic into your advertising copy?
Well, they believed that that's what we were for. You were to then show magic.
Chris was an English version of the Mad Men, weren't you? Because that was the same date.
What are the Mad Men?
Oh, you know.
Oh, the Mad Men. Oh, those Americans.
Yeah.
No, we were much madder than them. They were
No, but I mean, they were a big... I mean, they in fact were based on that...
They are the same people.
What was his name? Ogilvy?
David Ogilvy.
Yeah, you know, he was English, but he had a firm in New York, didn't he?
Yes.
And that was... So
well,
Mad
I mean,
Men...
he was the one who invented the very famous line about the Rolls Royce, saying the loudest sound you hear in this car is the ticking of the clock. And he was... the idea of magic was kind of... I mean, it was devised so that we could have this seminar and everybody could get together and have a wonderful time.
Another junket, yeah.
Well, talking of magic, perhaps we could move on to the books. Now, you're such different writers. Chris, how would you describe your métier?
Well, pretty lightweight, really. I mean, faced with Nigel, who, you know, always took his writing seriously. I think from a very early stage in, you know, writing, I mean, I did a lot of journalism before I wrote the first book, which actually was a book about hotels.
Oh, was it?
Yeah. It was
Damn it, I've got that. I should have put it on the pile.
It was called A Different World.
A Different World. It was fascinating.
Scooting around Europe writing about hotels.
Yes.
But also, I had got myself, luckily, involved with Punch magazine, and Punch was at that time, you know, the humour magazine. It was also full of reviews, and, you know, the reviews on cinema, theatre, you know, food, drink, and all the rest of it, and also just a little bit of seriousness sometimes in the articles. But most of it was, you know, the people I met there were humorists, and some of them were kind of extraordinary. People like Alan Corran, who was my editor. We all wanted to be as good as him, and he led the thing, as it were, from the front. And once I'd got into that world, it sort of somehow seemed natural to be a humorist, and you spent your time there was a Punch table lunch on every Friday, and I mean, they were some of the funniest times I've ever had, and people were firing off in all directions, and there were guests and there were all the rest of us there, and I think it just seemed natural that I was there. I mean, I didn't sort of, it wasn't a conscious thought.
Yeah. Well, maybe as a result of your experience in marketing and the advertising, without inferring anything other than you were actually commercial.
Right.
Nigel wasn't commercial, and
you could substitute the word successful.
no, I think
I know
there's no question there. You were successful in what you did, but the point is, given your commercial success and your appeal to the market in a number of ways, did you talk to Nigel about this and suggest he might consider other avenues than
no, I don't.
his intellectual?
I don't think so. I mean, I don't think.
No,
it's
we never
possible.
talked.
We
about
never
it,
talked
did we?
about what we were doing, and I think that. I mean, it's interesting what you said about advertising. I remember practically not being ticked off, but having a talking to by the senior chap in my group, that sort of creative chap, who said, I think I ought to explain what this business is about. He said, you are basically a travelling salesman, but not behind the wheel of a car, but behind a typewriter, and that's your job. And your interest in this job should be the sales figures of the product that you're advertising at the end of the month. Oh. Now, the moment he said that, I thought I'm in the wrong business here.
Yes.
And commercial, that didn't really kind of feature in my head when I started out at all. I think I was there. I thought I was there to entertain. I think
what
that's
was
all I
your
was meant.
What was your first successful selling book?
Well, The Diary of Somebody. I mean,
Yeah.
that was
That's
originally
the-
started because, in fact, that was Robert Morley who said, "Why don't you write
Was
a
it?
diary about a young man in London?" Because he said the way you go on and making terrible mistakes and going to the wrong places and having stories to tell about them. Why don't you have a nice young man who lives in a flat, tries to share a flat with people he can't get on with, is trying to kind of get his, make his way in life, and struggling, but is also a very nice chap. So I said, okay, and it started as a column in the Sunday Times, and then it was taken up as a book.
Gosh.
And the character was called Simon Crisp for a very specific reason, which was that Wendy, who I'm now married to and have been for many, many years, and who was at that time my girlfriend, told me a story of how she was at a dinner party once, and she was on one side of a bloke and was having this conversation with him, and she asked the man's name, and he said, "My name's Simon Crisp," and the woman on the other side said, "Oh," she said, "not by any chance related to the Smiths Crisps." And because of that, I just had to call him Simon Crisp.
But your books were extremely varied. You've written hilarious comedies, you've written thrillers, you've written the diaries and so forth. And I'd like to quote a line that appears in the Junket Man. A girl is explaining to the protagonist that I was quite impressed with your stuff, his writing. He's a travel writer. If you'd only put your mind to it, you could do very well indeed. Now the thing is, such is the variety that contemporaries of yours, William Boyd, Ian McEwan, and so forth, others, don't display that variety. They've stuck to their last and become more prominent.
Yes. Well, I don't think I was ever really a novelist. I mean, I just don't think I've got. I just don't think I've got it in me. I mean, the Amber Room. Well, there are 2 or 3 here. The Amber Room, Perfect Hero, which started off as The Long-Haired Boy, was made into a television series.
That was a straight novel, wasn't it?
That was a straight novel.
That was a kind of thriller.
And that was a kind of thriller, but that sort of came.
And this was a novel. This is a
chance.
novel, but in a kind of
What Nightingale sang.
Well, it's.
Well, it was really a kind of
It's a
story of my.
It's a social
childhood,
history,
really.
isn't it?
Yeah, it was about a little boy of 12 who's been brought up by his mother during the war with his father away, I mean, I was only, if it was about me at all, I was only 6 at the time, so I couldn't have a 6-year-old writing writing a bestseller. So I thought, well, he'd have to be 12, and so I based that really on my memories of being brought up in Surrey, and my father being away and so on, and being brought up on one's own. But this one, the Amber Room, was kind of a bit of a one-off, and it came about for 2 reasons really. One is that I had a very nasty skiing accident, and as a result of it was when I was taken to see a doctor in the ski resort, and he discovered he had to give me 52 stitches in the back of my head, which he did, I think it was rather like knitting making a sail, shoving the stuff in like this, and it took ages. And he said, I want to show you something on the way out. And he said, what do you think this is? And he was American, and he had a little framed square like that with a piece of material, black material, and on it was a Union Jack and the word England underneath. And I said, it looks like something off a blazer or something, I have no idea. He said, well, and I said, hang on a minute, I mean, anyway, that's wrong, because that's actually Great Britain, and England's a different flag altogether, so somebody's got something wrong here, and normally you don't see these sewn onto black jackets. Anyway, I went on blundering on, and he said, well, I'll tell you what I think this is, and I believe this to be part of the uniform of an English legion, as they were called, of the SS, of which there were at least two in the Second World War, picked out from the camps. And these were people who fought on behalf of the Germans. And there were many, many foreign people in the SS at that time, towards the end of the war, perhaps even more than there were Germans. I mean, the Indians were in there. I mean, the Indians were fighting on behalf of the Nazis. They hated us anyway. That was the sort of first part of the story. Then the second part of the story was that I happened to have been on one of these junkets to Russia, and I saw the room where the Amber Room had been, and at that time it was completely empty. Now it's a kind of reproduction which the Germans have made, and so I put somehow knocked the two together into this story.
Well, it's a very good book, gripping.
Is it?
Nigel.
Oh, I read it.
What do you mean, is it?
Yes.
I didn't mean is it. No, I meant. But that's an interesting way of looking at it.
That's a good point to raise your own view of Chris and his marketeering and so forth and prominence in the market while you were ploughing this very narrow furrow. Did you feel any resentment? Or
No.
why?
Margaret felt some resentment.
Margaret Morley.
Well, no, I tell you, it was funny. I applied for an Arts Council grant, you see, from that chap who was a famous chap. He was the head of it,
Yeah, whoever he was.
And I said, I'm working on this. I've published a book of that is Krishna, that is a kind of Homeric epic in form, but not in style. I'm now working on the style. I'd like to apply for one of these grants, and he wrote back and said, you can't write like Homer nowadays. It would be totally irrelevant. So I didn't get it. Meanwhile, you had got the Arts Council grant, and Margaret said, why did they give it to Chris? He makes money on this anyway. Why didn't they give it to Nigel who needs it?
Yes.
I'd forgotten that. It was a very small grant.
Yeah.
Let me tell you. I'll tell you another Morley story while we're at it. You see, because apparently, I mean, I wasn't in on the conversation, obviously, but apparently Robert and Sewell, Robert's great mate Sewell Stokes, wrote the original Oscar Wilde play that Robert starred in, and that was later made into a film with Robert. And they were talking about Chris and Nigel, and Sewell was going, I mean, I published this, you see, and he'd read that and liked it, and he said, I think Nigel's going to be the one who makes it. You watch. And Robert said, no, it'll be Chris. It'll be Chris.
Well, now
you didn't know.
Yeah.
So he was right.
Now you've published over 30 books between you.
Gosh.
Which is a fine achievement. But I have to point out that Anthony Trollope, he managed to squeeze out 85.
Good God.
Now, you're only just in your 80s. Is there any chance that we can expect anything more from you?
Well, yes. Agatha Christie also knocked out a few, and P.G. Wodehouse, I think, wrote over 90. And Wodehouse was still writing the last book when he was in hospital and when he died. So he was in the middle of the last book, which was kind of sort of jigged up and published by somebody else. I would love to do it again. I don't know. Maybe I've got various ideas, and I've done various things, and I've got various things that I've written over the last 2 or 3 years. The real problem nowadays is that publishers are very, very much more commercial than I think they ever used to be. And if you go to your publisher, particularly if you've got a publisher who's part of a big group, a huge international group, which many are, they want money back as quickly as they can. They want bestsellers.
Yes.
And of course the young are selling authors these days. Some of them who one's very often one barely heard of. And the publishers have then got to sell it to, as it were, the rest of the people in the group. I mean, it's very much a commercial enterprise, and they really want to get as much money as they can as quickly as they can.
What about you, Nigel? Have you got anything on the stocks?
Yes, I've got something. A small thing I've been working on, which is the whole history of the cosmos, and this was an idea that came to me in 1976, and it's starting to take shape.
Yes.
What, in the shape
And
of
I
the cosmos,
believe, and I believe your work Troilus is.
Troilus, yes. Troilus,
repackaging.
of course, this has been rewritten and made wonderfully relevant both to our own day and to the 60s in which it was written, and you can see it on a YouTube.
Well, that's good to know.
Mm.
Can I, as a general reader, urge you not to give up your
well, that's very kind.
your work, and
I second that.
and really brass up to give Trollope a good thrashing.
Yeah.
Okay,
That
gentlemen.
be something.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Bob.